Today's video is sponsored by Wren. Discover what your carbon footprint is and how you can offset it with Wren's environmental explanations. More on them in a bit. Some 384,000 kilometers from Earth, way up in the night sky, sits one of the most storied objects in our galaxy. The moon has been with our planet since the earliest days of the inner solar system, illuminating our nights for billions of years. Like some celestial watcher, it has witnessed all our world's long history, from the spark that created life, to the empire of the dinosaurs, to the arrival of conscious apes capable of inventing cool things like telescopes and digital watches. Yet, despite its closeness, the moon spent most of human history not as something understood, but as a source of limitless mystery. Originally thought of in religious terms, the moon quickly evolved alongside human thinking, becoming a place where we projected all our hopes and fears. It was an alien world, alive with fellow humanoids, a new frontier to be conquered, a place from where Soviet missiles could be rained down on Earth, ending the Cold War in a sea of fire. In the video today, Geograph is exploring the physical history of the moon itself and how this natural object influenced mankind's dreams and anxieties since time immemorial. Venture outside on a cloudless night, even in the most light-polluted cities, and chances are that at least one object in the night sky will still be visible. The moon is such a familiar sight that most of us probably never even think about it. Its various phases as unremarkable as the sun rising each morning or Netflix commissioning yet more trashy true crime documentaries. But make no mistake, our coolest celestial companion really is remarkable in so many ways that it's easy to lose count. Sitting an average of 384,400 kilometers from our planet, the moon is only 1% of Earth's mass, but a quarter of its size, a crazy high ratio for a natural satellite. In fact, it's so crazy that only one other planet or dwarf planet in our solar system has such a comparatively large moon: tiny Pluto and its companion Charon. The moons of Mars, by comparison, are little more than tiny upstart pebbles. And having this overgrown companion leads to all sorts of interesting side effects. Most Earth-sized planets have a serious wobble in their orbit, meaning their north poles lurch around like a drunken uncle dancing at a wedding. Our moon, though, acts like a concerned relative, hovering nearby, its gravity stopping our planet from staggering too far off course and being sick on a bridesmaid. This means that Earth's climate is far more stable and predictable than it would otherwise be, a massive bonus for anyone who doesn't enjoy constant weather-based chaos. But it's not just its stabilizing effects on Earth that make our moon so fascinating. In a solar system of extremes, its surface holds the record for the closest temperature we've ever recorded, clocking in at a bone-shivering minus 248 Celsius at its poles, which is about 20 degrees colder than the coldest planet. It's also constantly moving. We don't mean in the sense that, like Earth, it's spinning eternally through the void. We mean that it's getting further away from us each second. Every year, the moon retreats from Earth by about 3.8 centimeters. On a cosmic scale, that is obviously not very much, but over vast time periods, it can make a major difference. When the moon first formed some 4.5 billion years ago, it's thought that it was up to 10 times closer, meaning it would have dominated the night sky. Now, speaking of formation, for a long time, exactly how the moon formed was one of its greatest mysteries. Because it's so weirdly big, scientists had to discount the possibility of it coming into being alongside Earth, meaning that some later event must have been responsible. For a long time, it was thought that the moon might have been a giant rogue asteroid that got captured by Earth's gravity long ago. But then the Apollo missions brought back a giant pile of rocks and dust, which showed that the moon's composition is so similar to Earth's that independent formation would have been impossible. Think of it like taking a planetary DNA sample. An orphan moon born far away would have had as much in common with Earth as a sample taken from you and, say, the Moroccan royal family. Instead, it returns a match so close that it left only one viable option: that both the moon and the Earth came from the same parents. The names of those parents? Thea and proto-Earth. The theory goes, the back of the dawn of time, an additional planet formed in the inner solar system, an ancient world known today as Theia. The size of Mars, Theia was also freakishly close to proto-Earth, so close that at some point, billions of years ago, the two smashed into one another in an apocalyptic collision. So terrible was this crash, they basically pulverized both planets. From the resulting cloud of shared material emerged two new entities, modern Earth and the Moon. For the first 100 million years or so, the newborn moon was effectively molten, a ball of magma glowing red hot in the night sky. Even as its surface cooled, volcanism continued, leaving indelible marks. Those dark patches on the lunar surface, the one that kind of looks like a face, those are the remains of impact sites that filled with lava sometime before 1.2 billion BC. Today we know them as Maria, meaning seas, and give them romantic names like the Sea of Storms or the Sea of Tranquility, a contrast to lighter areas known as highlands. But don't let the names fool you. The lunar surface isn't made up of ancient seas and bracing Scottish-style highlands. Instead, it's an endless carpet of sterile dust and rubble known as the lunar regolith. Yet even this stone ocean is pretty exciting for scientists. Because the moon's days of volcanism are long over, and because it lacks weather or plate tectonics, truly ancient events are recorded in its geology. Basically, the moon today functions like a kind of celestial time capsule, letting scientists use its unchanging surface to peer deep into our solar system's past, studying impacts that are eons old. But we want to sidestep that science for now to focus on another story of the moon's past, not the tale of how it formed, but of its impact on mankind. Usually when we cover an astronomical body, there's a fairly easy start point for exploring humanity's relationship with it, when it was first discovered. But the moon has just always been there, hanging in the sky, so large and bright that even the least intellectually curious caveman would have been forced to take a bit of notice of it. Which means evidence of the moon's effect on us may be visible from earliest prehistory. In the Lascaux caves in France, for example, a collection of dots drawn alongside the 17,000-year-old images of horses and bulls is thought to be an early lunar calendar. Even further back, plenty of Ice Age art has been found featuring a motif of 30 notches matching up with the number of lunar cycles in a solar year. While it's not proven beyond doubt, plenty of super smart dudes think that this could be evidence of prehistoric cultures using the moon as a timepiece, perhaps to track when full moons would allow them to hunt with greater visibility. Another possibility is they used it for tracking fertility. One ancient carving, known as the Venus of Lossel, shows what appears to be a pregnant woman holding her abdomen with one hand and a horn featuring 13 lines with the other. This could be extremely early evidence of humans linking the cycles of the moon to female fertility, maybe even a sign that they used its waxing and waning to figure out when to plan for children. Of course, all of this is just speculation. With a lack of spare TARDISes lying around, it's not like we can go zip back in time and be all like, yo, cave dudes, what's the deal with you and the moon, huh? Come on, tell us. Still, the sheer visibility of the moon in the night sky, in an era when it would be the only source of light, makes it unlikely that prehistoric peoples didn't at least wonder about it, especially when you consider just how often our satellite pops up in later cultures. In ancient Earth, the moon appeared in conjunction with the god Khonsu, a figure related to death and the afterlife. In prehistoric Ireland, carvings of the moon show up in tombs over 5,000 years old. One of these at Noath in County Meath includes a spectacular attempt at an accurate lunar map, the earliest that we found. Of course, the influence of the moon wasn't just confined to ancient Europe and the Mediterranean. In Asia, the story of Buddha's path to enlightenment incorporates lunar imagery. In pre-Columbian America, cultures such as the Mayas and the Aztecs alternately worshipped and feared the moon. Even the two biggest modern religions, Christianity and Islam, have important festivals linked to lunar cycles. Ramadan doesn't officially begin until a young crescent moon is sighted over Mecca, while Easter lines up with the first full moon following the spring equinox. The moon, then, was clearly a big deal for our ancestors. Sometimes a god, sometimes a monster, sometimes just a useful way for marking the passage of time. But it would only be much closer to our era that this relationship got a major upgrade. The tracking the moon went from the preserve of astrologers and holy men to that of scientists. And this lunar revolution would start with one man, Now, just before we continue with today's video, a quick word from today's fantastic sponsor, Wren. Wren is a website focused on the effects of climate change and how we can all individually combat it. So head over to their site and you can go through a quick free questionnaire about what your consumption habits are. We're talking questions like how often do you shop online, how many times per week do you eat red meat. It takes about 5 minutes, and when you're done, they've got lots of handy information and graphs that put your carbon footprint into context. But Wren doesn't just stop there. They're constantly scouring the globe for reforestation efforts and carbon capture projects that they want to help. And if you're so inclined, you can help too. After you've determined your carbon footprint, you can choose to donate a monthly sum that will offset your own footprints by helping to fund some of these environmental projects. For instance, Wren recently partnered with a California-based biochar project that removes flammable biomass from high-risk areas and pyrolyzes it. They mix the resulting biochar with compost and sell it to local farmers, helping to reduce the risk of wildfires and climate change. And once you made a financial commitment, you can begin receiving a monthly update centered around rainforest protection, tree planting initiatives, and carbon capture projects. Wren knows that it's going to take a lot of work to address climate change, but it's easier when we all contribute just a little bit. If that sounds something that you'd be interested in checking out, please do head over to wren.co or use my referral link in the description box below. And as a partnership between Wren and my channel, they're going to plant 10 extra trees for each of the first 100 people who sign up using my referral link. And now back to today's video. In late 1609, the greatest astronomer ever name-checked in a Queen song stood hunched over his telescope, preparing what would become known as the first accurate observations of the moon. We say would become known because it would later turn out that Galileo had been pipped to the post by the English astronomer Thomas Harriot. But since Harriot failed to tell anyone about his pioneering achievements, it would be Galileo who took all of the credit for opening a new chapter in our history with the moon. Of course, the Italian wasn't the first person to try and accurately record our satellite's surface. Da Vinci had made sketches nearly 100 years earlier, while the Dutch master Jan van Eyck had painted a remarkably detailed lunar surface way back in the 1430s. But, aided by an early telescope, Galileo's observations went beyond just roughly mapping the moon's features. It was Galileo who first discovered the moon wasn't a perfect sphere, that it had valleys, mountains, and other features just like Earth. It was Galileo who named the dark patches Marias, or seas, but even he seemed to realize that this was a romanticized name. One of Galileo's greatest observations concerned the lack of clouds on the moon, which led him to deduce that there was little or no water and thus, quite possibly, no life. This was a remarkably prescient observation, one that would be backed up by Adrian Ozout in 1666, who argued that the lack of city lights, green patches in springtime, or signs of storms sighted through telescopes meant the moon was uninhabited. Not that this would stop the world's crazies from projecting their ancient aliens' fantasies onto our lunar companion, most famously in the Great Moon Hoax. One of the strangest tales from the dawn of mass media, the Great Moon Hoax is also remarkable for how late in the game it happened. By 1835, the moon had effectively lost most of its mystery, its secrets slowly chipped away by ever more powerful telescopes. Just 2 years earlier, German astronomers Wilhelm Beer and Johann Madler had published lunar maps so detailed that they left no room for hidden aliens. Yet when the New York Sun splashed on August the 25th, 1835 with the story Great Astronomical Discoveries, Freaky Alien Dudes Living on the Moon, the American public went apeshit. Over 6 articles, the paper pulled millions into a world of whimsical nonsense, a world in which the famous astronomer John Herschel had supposedly used a powerful new telescope to spy everything from unicorns to temple-building winged natives living on the lunar surface. It helped that the hoaxer, reporter Richard Adams Locke, had chosen his supposed source well. At the time, the real John Herschel was doing fieldwork in South Africa, and so effectively was unreachable for verification. Yet the readiness with which the public swallowed the story is also something of a puzzle. By now, any rational hope that aliens might be living on the moon had died long ago. The average newspaper reader in 1835 almost certainly didn't really expect humanoids to be chilling up there with the soup dragons. So, why was the hoax so successful? The answer lies in humanity's fascinating relation with our satellite. As we said a couple of chapters back, the moon has long been a place where we've projected our dreams and anxieties. In 1835 America, though, the young nation's anxieties were closer to home. Society was divided and great terrifying changes were underway. So people seem to have willingly suspended their disbelief to allow themselves to get swept up with the great moon hoax with a bit of a knowing wink at stories of inscrutable moon natives allowing America a safe outlet for very real anxieties over how it was treating native peoples closer to home. This is one of the most interesting features of our history with the moon. How we've used frictions to constantly project our fears onto it in the form of gods and monsters or distant aliens. Yet while tales of humanoids on the lunar surface may have been wholly made up in 1835, they wouldn't stay that way for long, because the next great era of lunar science was now only a century away, and it would culminate with one of America's signature achievements, putting a real man on the moon. In the whole of human history, there have only been 12 people to ever set foot on the moon. That's a staggeringly small number, and it gets even more incredible when you realize that they were all 12 white American men born within 12 years of each other. Of these men, only 4 of whom are still alive at the time of writing. None spent more than 75 hours on the lunar surface, including time spent inside the landing module. But even getting to this point required a whole host of incredible breakthroughs and not a little competitive spirit. Though the total number isn't zero, is entirely thanks to America becoming terrified of losing the planet-wide dong-measuring contest known as the space race. The transformation of the moon from cool thing in the sky to frontier to be conquered technically begins in 1959 with the 3 lunar probes. But really, it began on October 4th, 1957, when the USSR's Sputnik 1 became the first man-made satellite in space. The Soviet breakthrough caught Uncle Sam sitting around with his thumb up his bottom, an impression that only increased as the breakthroughs piled up. In 1959 alone, the USSR's lunar probes conducted in turn the first flyby of the moon, the first controlled crash landing on the lunar surface, and took the first photos of the far side of the moon. Finally, following Yuri Gagarin's successful spaceflight, America decided it had enough of looking like the dumb hick superpower. On May 25th, 1961, JFK took to a podium and declared that the US would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And so began the most intense period yet in the history of moon exploration. There were NASA's 9 Ranger missions from 1961 to 1965, which crashed into the moon at high speed while taking as many photos as possible and gave us our first detailed look at the moon's surface. There was the USSR's Lunar 9, which became, in 1966, the first craft to land safely, transmitting back panoramic view. Then there was Lunar 10, which became the first to orbit our satellite. By 1968, NASA's own series of orbiters were circling the moon, photographing some 99% of its surface, revealing a level of detail unthinkable even at the start of the decade. With those images, whatever sense of mystery remained around our closest neighbor evaporated, and in its place came something far more exciting, a sense of possibility, a sense that finally mankind might touch another world. Now, we don't want to give the impression that this era was nothing but competition between the superpowers. There were joint breakthroughs and cooperation, such as the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which barred the stationing of missiles on the moon and prevented any country from claiming sovereignty over any celestial object. It remains the basis of space law to this very day. But the big achievement, the one everyone remembers, came in July of 1969. On the 20th, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first men to ever set foot on the moon, opening a whole new chapter in human history. They also could have potentially ended it. Despite nobody in 1969 believing winged humanoids lived on the moon, the scientific community couldn't preclude some strange microorganism existing there. And this was a problem, because any alien organism might have some insane effects if it was let loose on Earth. So despite everyone being about 99.99% sure that moon cooties weren't real, all 3 Apollo astronauts were ordered to quarantine for 3 weeks after returning to Earth. A special procedure was even put in place to ensure that their capsule wouldn't be opened until it could be isolated. But when crunch time came, those retrieving the astronauts just went ahead and opened the capsule while it was still in the ocean, letting any potential contaminants come flooding out. And so it was that the best proof against killer moon organisms became the entire world not dying in 1969. Strangely, for all it's now remembered as a historic achievement, the legacy of Apollo 11 didn't last long. With the Space Race 1, Uncle Sam breathed a sigh of relief, mopped the sweat off his brow, then slowly reinserted his thumb into his star-spangled butt. Within just 3.5 years of Neil Armstrong making history, Apollo 17 became the final crewed mission that the moon has seen. Unless you count the secret 1989 British expedition, codenamed Grand Day Out, humanity still hasn't been back. As the Apollo program ended, it seemed like humankind had reached the farthest extent of its interest in our celestial cousin. With the USSR failing to launch its own crewed mission, Earth's attention drifted elsewhere. But despite all appearances, this wouldn't be the end, because there's still one big part of our relationship with the moon that we've got to talk about: the future. In the end, it was good old-fashioned H2O that did it. In 1994, NASA's Clementine spacecraft returned a tranche of photos of the moon, some of which hinted at the possibility of ice hiding in craters at the lunar poles. When this was confirmed by an orbiter in 1999, it suddenly made the moon sexy again. After all, the presence of ice meant a potential source of water, and that meant that humanity might be able to actually achieve every 6-year-old's greatest dream to create a base for living on the lunar surface. The discovery triggered a renewed surge of interest in our satellite, and not just from NASA. Over the next 2 decades, countries such as Japan, India, and Israel all sent their own probes up, but the most successful launches came courtesy of Beijing. In 2013, China became only the 3rd country in history to land a probe on the moon. 6 years later, it went one better, becoming the first nation ever to place a lander on the far side. Only intended to run for 3 months, the rover released is still there, still making headlines by taking photos of weird cube-shaped boulders. But perhaps the greatest development where the moon is concerned has been within NASA. For the first time since Apollo 17's crew left the dusty lunar surface behind, the space agency is committed to returning human beings to the site of its greatest win. Ordered by President Trump in December 2017, the Artemis program has a stated goal of landing the first woman and the first person of color on the moon by 2025. The hope is that this will reignite the American public's interest in our satellite, becoming a springboard for sci-fi sounding future projects like building an orbital base above the lunar surface. Even if Artemis ultimately fails, it won't be the end of humans trying to get to the moon. SpaceX is currently working on a plan to take tourists into lunar orbit, while Blue Origin has already gone one further by announcing a crewed base to be built on the moon's south pole. While all of these plans, even the comparatively simple Artemis landing, represent huge logistical challenges, it's exciting to think we may soon be going back to finish what we started, to build the shining lunar cities that Galileo failed to spot through his telescope all those centuries ago. The future of the moon, then, may be the one everyone assumed was coming in the 1950s and 60s, a future of moon bases, of lunar tourism, of thousands of scientists doing as they do in Antarctica today and living for a few months on the moon as they conduct their research. If you're anything like us, you probably find this an exciting proposition, both from a yay science perspective, but also from a I'm living in the future perspective. Yet while humanity's immediate future with the moon looks rosy, what about the bigger picture? What happens when we move out to timescales in the millions or billions of years? At these sorts of scales, things look very different, less a tale of companionship and more one of literal drifting apart. We mentioned way back at the beginning of this video that the moon is moving away from the Earth at a rate of about 3.8 centimeters a year. Known as lunar retreat, the phenomena is unstoppable. There's no way to reverse the change, to make sure our satellite stays by our side. As the eons accumulate, we'll begin to notice the difference. 600 million years from now, the moon will be so distant that it will no longer be able to cover the sun. Solar eclipses observed since time immemorial will cease to exist as a phenomenon visible from Earth. As the moon drifts away, the length of our days will change too, not by much at first, just a couple of milliseconds every century. But as the millennia march by, the change will become slightly more noticeable, and with it, the whole rhythm of the Earth will be gradually transformed. Now, it's unlikely our moon will ever truly escape Earth. The timescales required are so massive that our sun should die first, expanding to such a degree that both planet and satellite are fried before they can split apart. By then, the lunar surface may be littered with the remains of forgotten moon bases built unfathomable ages ago by a race that called themselves human, a race that since the dawn of time has stared up into the night sky at a strange glowing orb hanging there and wondered what it might mean. Hopefully, as space agencies return their attention to the moon in the coming decades, we might, at last, find an answer. So I really hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.